You weren't born into freedom. You were placed into a buffer zone. The idea of the middle class feels natural, like a permanent feature of society. But it's not. It was built, engineered, crafted as a tool, not a destination. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, as industrialization took over Europe and the United States, governments and elites faced a problem: how to grow an economy without triggering revolt. The answer wasn't just better wages or access to goods. It was psychological, to give workers just enough to feel secure, but not enough to walk away. The middle class was born as a buffer zone, a layer designed to absorb pressure from below and protect power above. These people wouldn't be rich, but they'd be stable. They wouldn't riot, because they had something to lose. The pitch was simple: get educated, get a job, buy a home, retire in comfort. It was never about freedom. It was about loyalty. The system offered them safety, but only within narrow limits. Home ownership came with debt. Education came with obedience. Retirement came with dependence. And every one of those benefits could be taken away if you stopped playing your role. You weren't handed power. You were handed a role in a machine designed to run smoothly, as long as you didn't question it. And here's the painful truth: most people today are still inside that machine. They call it normal life. But it was never about your success. It was about your participation. Stability was never the reward. It was the bait. After World War II, Western governments needed to rebuild not only cities, but trust. People had lived through depression, chaos, and global conflict. They were tired, and tired people don't rebel if you give them a dream. That dream was crafted into a simple formula: steady job, affordable house, good school, retirement plan. It was marketed as the life you deserve. But under the surface, it served a different purpose. The modern middle class wasn't just allowed to exist. It was strategically designed as a stabilizer. These were the taxpayers, the policy supporters, the ones who wouldn't protest because they had mortgages to pay and children in school. As long as they believed the system worked for them, they would defend it. And for a while, it did seem to work. In the 1950s and 60s, a single income could support a family. A college degree meant upward mobility. Pensions felt solid. But even then, the cracks were forming. The system wasn't built to empower the middle class. It was built to keep them compliant. Homes were pushed through 30-year debt. Education became a ticket you had to buy, often on credit. And retirement wasn't freedom. It was a countdown, fully dependent on the performance of markets and the honesty of employers. Stability wasn't real. It was leveraged, bought with future obligations, packaged as peace. The system gave just enough to prevent questioning, but never enough to allow escape. And now, as pensions dissolve, tuition explodes, and home ownership becomes a trap instead of a ladder. It's clear, the dream wasn't designed to last. It was designed to keep you working, paying, and hoping just long enough. In every crisis, the rich stay rich, the poor stay poor, and the middle pays the price. The myth of stability collapses the moment a real crisis hits, and history shows a brutal pattern. When the system shakes, it's not the elite or the impoverished who bear the full force. It's the middle, the people with just enough to lose, and no real way to protect it. During the Great Depression, it wasn't the wealthy who lined up at soup kitchens. It was clerks, teachers, business owners, people who thought they were safe. In 2008, it wasn't hedge fund managers losing their homes. It was working families with steady jobs and fixed mortgages, crushed by a collapse they didn't cause and couldn't escape. When COVID hit, that same pattern played out again. Billionaires got richer. Low-income workers had government assistance or informal networks. But the middle class? They lost businesses, they drained savings, they watched their industries disappear. And as always, they had too much to qualify for help, but not enough to survive without bleeding. Why does it keep happening this way? Because the middle class is the shock absorber of the modern economy. They're the ones with homes that can be foreclosed, 401ks that can collapse, kids in college whose tuition still needs paying. The poor are already excluded. The rich are already hedged. But the middle? They're exposed and heavily invested in the very system that betrays them. They don't revolt because they believe recovery is coming. They don't opt out because they've been told they're lucky to be in. But what if the real reason the middle class always gets hit first is because they were never meant to win? You don't own your life, you lease it, at interest. For decades, the middle class was taught to believe in ownership, owning a home, owning a car, owning an education. These weren't just financial goals, they were identity markers, proof that you were responsible, successful, normal. But behind each of those milestones sat a contract, a payment plan, an interest rate, a signature on the dotted line of debt. And little by little, the dream of ownership turned into a slow, quiet form of economic servitude. Take the average home. Most people sign a 30-year mortgage, which means they don't own that house. The bank does. Miss a few payments, and you'll see who the real owner is. Add property taxes, insurance, repairs, and you quickly realize the cost of ownership is often higher than rent. But it feels safer because it's yours. Except it's not, until you've paid hundreds of thousands in interest and fees. Or consider the car. It's advertised as freedom, but financed like a trap. Monthly payments, ballooning insurance, depreciation from day one. You don't own freedom, you rent it, with obligations attached. And if you ever try to exit the system early, you'll pay for that too. And then there's education, perhaps the most dangerous illusion of all. For millions, a degree is supposed to be a ticket to mobility. But it often comes with debt that lasts longer than the benefit. Students graduate into saturated job markets, underpaid roles, and rising living costs, all while trying to pay back a system that promised them a future. What they got instead was a financial leash. This is what economists call a leveraged lifestyle, when everything you think you own is actually a future claim on your time, your labor, your peace of mind. You don't live free. You live in service of payments. You're not building wealth. You're financing a script you were handed at 18 and told to follow. And the cruelest part? It feels legitimate. Because everyone around you is doing the same. It feels safe. Because you're told it's normal. But normal doesn't mean free. And if your life can be repossessed, taxed away, or suspended by a lender's decision, it was never really yours to begin with. Ownership without autonomy isn't wealth. It's a costume, designed to keep you quiet, busy, and proud enough not to question it. You weren't trained to build wealth. You were trained to keep it flowing for someone else. From the first day of school, the path is laid out. Study hard, get good grades, get into college, get a job, work until you're 65, and then, if you're lucky, enjoy what's left. This isn't a conspiracy, it's a design. A system built to create reliable workers, predictable taxpayers, and obedient consumers. The goal was never your freedom. It was your participation in an economy that feeds off your time, your attention, and your labor. Middle-class life is not structured around wealth creation. It's structured around wage dependence. You're taught to trade time for money, not to own assets. You learn how to apply for a job, not how to build something. You're handed a budget template, not a blueprint for leverage. And if you ever ask, why don't we learn investing in school? The answer is simple, because the system needs users, not owners. This is why most middle-class workers can go 30, 40 years with a steady income and still end up financially fragile. They may have earned hundreds of thousands, even millions, over a lifetime, but they have little to show for it, besides a mortgage, a used car, and a retirement account that's more hope than strategy. Why? Because the structure funnels everything away. Taxes take the top, debt eats the middle, inflation nibbles at the bottom, and lifestyle, fueled by the illusion of comfort, does the rest. You're rewarded with just enough to stay in place. Vacation once a year. A new iPhone. A sense of pride that you're doing okay. But you're not climbing. You're cycling. Through jobs, through payments, through responsibilities that never quite end. Meanwhile, those who understand the game play differently. They don't work for money. They make money work for them. They build or buy assets, things that generate cash flow, appreciate over time, or reduce their need to labor. They optimize for ownership, not obligation. But for the middle class, the path is narrower, not by force, but by design. Not because you're incapable, but because you were never shown the map. When the system falls, it doesn't land on the rich, it lands on you. Every time the economy faces a crisis, the headlines focus on the collapse, the recession, the market crash, the unemployment wave. But behind every headline is a silent transaction. One group bleeds so another can survive. And almost every time, it's the middle class that bleeds. Not because they made the biggest mistakes, but because they were positioned to absorb the cost. Take 2008. The banks gambled, the executives cashed out, the government stepped in, but the homeowners were left to drown. Foreclosures surged, pensions tanked. Middle-class families who played by the rules lost everything, while the system that failed them got bailed out and rebuilt. Then came 2020. A global pandemic, shutdowns, supply chain chaos, and once again, it was small businesses, the heart of middle-class independence, that were crushed. Restaurants, shops, services, gone overnight. Meanwhile, megacorporations scaled. Amazon, Walmart, digital giants. They didn't just survive, they multiplied. Why? Because the rules changed, and those who wrote them already had the playbook. Crisis isn't just disaster. It's reallocation of wealth, of power, of trust. And the middle class? They're the cushion that softens the blow for everyone else. They lose jobs, take pay cuts, tap into retirement funds, and downsize dreams, all while being told to hang in there. They donate. They fund GoFundMes. They carry aging parents and adult children. They stretch until there's nothing left. Not because they're foolish, but because they're programmed to hold the system up when it stumbles. And each time, the same promise is whispered: we'll bounce back. But bounce to where? Back into the same fragile roles, the same leveraged lives, the same exposed position. The cycle isn't broken. It's confirmed and made stronger for the next round. Collapse doesn't happen to the system. The system uses collapse, and the middle class pays the bill. The middle class works to stay secure. The wealthy work to stay free. The system was never broken for everyone. For a select few, it works exactly as intended. They don't rely on job security or retirement accounts. They don't chase stability. They create influence. And most importantly, they don't build wealth through labor. They build it through ownership. While the middle class was trained to measure success in salaries and degrees, the wealthy were raised on a different currency: assets. They acquire companies, real estate, intellectual property, and equity. These are things that generate money without requiring time, and more importantly, without permission. A job can be taken, a paycheck can be paused. But a cash-flowing asset? That's leverage. They've always known that income is fragile, but capital compounds. That effort is finite, but systems scale. That playing fair doesn't guarantee reward, but owning the board does. Look closely at how they move. They use debt strategically. They protect themselves through legal structures, not hope. They delegate, automate, negotiate, while the middle class saves receipts and does their own taxes. They invest in relationships, influence, and positioning, while everyone else is told to just work harder. But perhaps their biggest secret is psychological. They don't worship safety, because they understand that safety is often just control in disguise. They aren't reckless, they hedge. But they also act, long before the middle class even finishes researching. They see systems, not just symptoms. And when a shift is coming, they don't wait to be told. They move early, quietly, effectively, and that's why they never fall the same way. Because while the masses ask, what will they do for us? The wealthy are already asking, what's our next move, and how do we own it? The goal was never to win the game. It was to realize you could leave it. If everything you've been told about financial safety was part of a script, then real freedom begins by rewriting it, not by burning everything down, not by pretending the system doesn't exist, but by no longer depending on it to define your future. Escaping the game doesn't mean rejecting responsibility. It means shifting from survival to strategy, from being managed to taking control. It begins when you stop measuring life by titles, degrees, or how stable your job is. It begins when you start asking new questions. What do I own? What can I build? What do I control, regardless of what happens out there? You don't need to be a billionaire to move differently. You need clarity, liquidity, skills, leverage. You need to stop waiting for someone to reward you for playing by the rules and start writing your own. That might mean building a small business that compounds, or turning a side skill into a cash-flowing offer, or investing in assets that don't need you to show up 5 days a week. But most of all, it means letting go of the false security that was sold to you in a shiny brochure called The American Dream. A dream that asked for 40 years of work in exchange for a retirement that may never come. You were never meant to be a cog with benefits. You were meant to be a builder, someone who understands the system but refuses to live trapped by it. The middle class was a creation. Now it's time to create yourself outside of it.